All right, good morning, everybody. I'll make it on the recording. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. All those who are watching at distant places or watching us at a different time, welcome, and thanks for being with us. I know we've had a cold, icy few days, and it's great to be out and fellowshipping again with people. And also, thoughts out to Tom and Linda. If you're watching, I hope you better be watching. But I hope you're feeling better, and if not, I hope you get well. I hope you get well really soon. All right. So join me on a journey here. I'm going to talk about a few things. I'd love for you to kind of come with me on this journey, and we'll explore some things together. Anybody seen Matrix 4? I get one. Okay, so it got kind of, I guess you might call it mixed reviews. It seems like from the people I've talked to, it's kind of a love it or hate it. They either loved it or they hated it. They either felt like they got it or they felt like it was way off track or something like that. And I liked it. So I'll put that out there. But I don't want to plot spoil too much, but part of the plot of Matrix 4 is it's a movie about making a movie. And supposedly, the true story is that the producer of the film didn't really want to make a sequel, a fourth, what is that, a quadricle? Whatever. But anyway, they didn't want to make another one, but they really felt like the writing was on the wall and they were going to make one with their permission or not. And so the producer-director decided to go ahead and say yes and make the film while they still had creative control. And they could make whatever film they wanted. And so they end up making this really sarcastic kind of film that has a lot of social commentary and political commentary in it, a lot of commentary on sort of the film industry. But also it's sort of it kind of breaks that third wall. The third wall, and you're kind of, it kind of is about a movie about the making of a movie. Okay, so I kind of fantasized about that idea, being in a movie, talking about the movie that you're making while you're in the movie, and I thought that'd be kind of fun to apply to a sermon. So what would I tell myself? I'm giving a sermon. How would I tell myself to give a sermon now while I'm giving a sermon? And so I kind of fantasized about that idea. But anyway, it does raise some interesting questions about why we do things and why I'm up here and what I should say. So here I am, preaching. How should I proceed? How would I tell me to proceed? And why am I here anyway? Why me? Why not you? Why not someone else? And I thought about that, and a lot of people don't want to do it. They're reticent to do it. You know, it's kind of like in school or somewhere they ask for volunteers, and you shrink down in your seat so they won't pick you kind of thing. Anyway, not quite that bad. But we have a lot of people clearly qualified here. We have a lot of ex-preachers, right, and teachers and all kinds of people. But people seem to not like to want to preach. It's a scary thing for a lot of people. And it's scary for me, too. This guy looks scared. So should we maybe it's because of the title, preaching. Maybe we shouldn't call it preaching. Preaching is a very, at 11:11 we like to play with words and give things new words and new definitions. Preaching is kind of an old word. I mean, it's kind of an old-fashioned part of the past in some ways, and we don't use that all the time in here. We may somebody who presides, or maybe somebody who's guiding the discussion. But preacher we don't use as much. But anyway, maybe that's it. Maybe people don't really like the idea that maybe they don't want to be preached to. They don't like that concept. Or maybe maybe nobody feels really qualified to do it. It's kind of, it's sort of difficult. Maybe they're afraid that if they preach, they'll say something wrong. And they'll get caught in front of all these people, and of course online, the millions watching online. And of course, it'll be on some digital medium forever for future generations to see you mess up. So that's actually kind of making me nervous now that I just said it. Maybe they're afraid they won't live up to whatever they say. And I can guarantee you I will not live up to what what I say, because I'm a human being and I make mistakes, and everyone does. But is that it? Is that the reason people are kind of afraid to preach? Or maybe it's the fear of hypocrisy, of saying something and then being caught doing something else that doesn't match up with what you said, because now you're on the record. That does make it kind of nerve-wracking. Or maybe it's being perceived, people don't want to preach because they're afraid they'll be perceived as judgmental. I mean, who am I to tell you anything? Or maybe they're afraid they'll be perceived as narcissistic. You know, this crazy person up here telling us what to do, kind of thing. And it also, that coming back to that question, does anyone really need a preacher? And if so, why? Do you need someone to point you to the truth? Whatever that is. Which raises the question of, where is the truth? Where is it? Is it something someone else has found and is going to tell you about? Is it something that you need a guide that knows more about to show to you? Or is the truth something that's in you already? Wait a minute, there's a song. It's like the song we just sang, right? I'll give you the lyrics. I like it so much. You may see a million gateways home. You may think there's only one way through. You may be waiting for the kingdom to come, or you may believe it's in you. But no matter what you do, love will find you. Great song, a very 11:11 song. So I don't know, perhaps we are drawn to teach the things that we need to learn. Okay, I have a story for you. And it comes from a Hindu source. It's about a father and son. The father notices that his son is leaving the house really early every day and then coming back really late. He can't even catch him. And he wonders where his son is going all day. So he catches him coming back in one afternoon, and he's like, "Son, where have you been? Why do you keep going away all day?" And the son says, "Father, I've gone out to the woods because I find when I go to a different place, I feel closer to God." And the father laughs and he says, "Son, you don't have to go anywhere different to find God. God is everywhere." To which the son replies, "Yes, Father, but in the woods, I am different." This is magic. Okay, so where are the answers? Where are the answers? Are they in us? Are they in the outside world? Or are they kind of worked out by a sort of praxis where they're in us, but the world is like a tool that brings out what is inside of us, and other people are like tools that bring out what is inside us. Okay, so at the end of The Wizard of Oz, talk about a cultural story everyone knows, right? At the end of The Wizard of Oz, the Good Witch declares that Dorothy had the means to go home all along. It was in her own soul, you might say, and not in the external circumstances of Oz. But even so, there were those pesky flying monkeys. So on this journey to see the wizard, this journey of enlightenment, there are these distractions. Some of the distractions are very solid and terrifying, like the monkeys. I'm sure we were all terrified of the monkeys as children. It's one of the scariest things in The Wizard of Oz, if you're a child. But we still feel compelled to follow the path, to try to find our way, to try to find truth. So what are we, and where is our truth? So this is the Epiphany season in the Methodist Church, and in most Western churches, this is the Epiphany season. And all over the world today, in churches, they're reading 1 Corinthians 15. It's one of the scriptures, or one of the parts of scriptures they'll be reading. And they'll be reading out of 1 Corinthians 15 for at least a couple of more weeks in the Epiphany schedule. And this is the fifth Sunday after Epiphany. If you're keeping track, this is Epiphany 5. So 1 Corinthians 15 is one of the strangest chapters in the Bible, in my opinion. I've always come back over and over to it to try to figure out what it's saying and where it fits in. It's a real enigma in a lot of ways. And Let me tell you a couple of reasons why. I think it's a really interesting. Obviously, it's in the reading for today because Epiphany is about the Spirit coming into the world, and that's why we have it in the Epiphany reading. And there's a lot about the Spirit in 1 Corinthians. But right off the bat, 1 Corinthians 15 contains one of the oldest firsthand descriptions of Christianity and Jesus that we have. We know there's a lot of debate about when the Gospels were written, but we're a lot more sure about when these letters were written. This letter was almost certainly written in 56 AD by Paul. So we know when it was written, not long after Jesus' life. We know that Paul knew a lot of people who knew Jesus personally, and he had interactions with the apostles, right? So Paul, it's not firsthand in the sense that Paul saw Jesus when he was in his physical body, but he certainly knew a lot of people who did. Now, the problem is, what Paul says about Christianity does not square very well with what it says in the other Gospels about how Christianity began and what happened with Jesus. So our best candidate for the oldest Gospel is probably Mark, and Mark was written, best case scenario, 10 years after, probably more like 20 years after 1 Corinthians was written. So let me just give you a couple of examples. So who was the first observer of the resurrection? Paul clearly says in the first 3 lines of 1 Corinthians that it was Peter. Peter was the first witness of the resurrection. In other words, Peter started Christianity. He saw the risen Lord. Well, that's not what it says in Mark, is it? Read Mark, it's great. Or pick one, read any of them. In Mark, it says Mary Magdalene and the women were the first to see Jesus risen. So the later written book is different than the earlier account that we have. It's an enigma because it's hard to imagine that a writer would try to make the story more marketable by adding women as the people who saw Jesus first. In that culture, that would not have been a selling point, right? So that's interesting. Another enigma is what form was Jesus in when he was resurrected? Where's sort of my launching point for what I want to talk about next. So Paul, this 1 Corinthians 15, most of it is about, it's Paul's, Paul is talking about how we can continue to live after we die. And he's answering detractors that are saying, it's silly to say that there's a resurrection because clearly everything dies. What do you mean, Paul? Are there going to be people walking around like zombies? I mean, how is this thing going to work? So most of the chapter, most of it he's talking about spiritual bodies and carnal bodies, and they're not the same thing, he says. And so he starts off by defending his legitimacy as an apostle, and he does it by saying he saw the risen Lord. He saw the risen Lord just as the rest of the apostles saw the risen Lord. And he uses that as a launching point to talk about spiritual bodies. The thing is, though, if he believed that Jesus came to him physically, as it's sort of portrayed in the Gospels, then it would undermine his entire argument in the rest of the book. Because the whole book is about how he starts off by saying Jesus came to him, and then he says that when we die, we have spiritual bodies. They're not like physical bodies. You know, they're like, a leaf falls from a tree, it dies. The seed falls from the tree, it dies, and then another tree comes up. It's not going to be the same thing as when it goes into the ground. So he makes this big thing. So Paul talks about us being kind of these dual beings in a way. We have a spiritual side and we have a carnal side. Anyway, so the takeaway of the chapter basically is that we have this spiritual component that survives. It's very different than our physical life, or so says Paul. And that's why we talk about that in Epiphany. So what are we? And 1 Corinthians really takes that on. A spirit, a body, both. Oops, I forgot to do this. That's Paul. Actual photograph. There we go. I meant to put that one up and I skipped it, sorry. So one of the oldest titles for Jesus in the ancient Christian community was Emmanuel. And Emmanuel means? God, very good. Several people said it. God is with us. It's a very old title for Jesus, maybe the oldest. So Jesus was seen as a symbol that God was part of us very early on. a new way of thinking about God, that God is not separate and up in the sky, but he's been shown through example to be part of us and accessible to us, not a reality outside of us. And they felt like Jesus proved that suspicion they had, that that's the way things were, that we are fundamentally spiritual beings. I want to go ahead and invite the band back up. Okay, so if you turn to Mark 9:50 and 9:51, slide. Okay. Jesus asked, what good is salt? Right? You know this one? This is a very strange, when I was a kid, I thought this was a very strange scripture, and it's just kind of stuck in between a couple of other things that Jesus said, and it's not very well explained, right? So what good is salt if it's lost its saltiness? Okay. What is it fit for? And then the weirdest part, make sure and maintain the salt within yourselves. Advice from Jesus. It's very strange. My favorite interpretation of this is the one that I get from John Shelby Spong. Some of you may be familiar with his work. I think he died recently. I believe he died recently. Anyway, Spong interprets this odd passage to mean that the Spirit is the source of all good. And that's what the saltiness represents, that we do good from the indwelling of the Spirit being manifested through us. That's the way to think about life, to think about the good news, is that we are in manifesting the Spirit. We can't grow without it. It would be sort of a hamster on a wheel if we didn't have the indwelling of the Spirit. So that's the saltiness that you don't want to go without, that you want to renew on a regular basis, or so says Jesus. So what is this salt? What does it mean? What are we, and why are we here? And perhaps the best answer, the Epiphany answer, is that we're spirits. The Epiphany story seems to be that we are spirits making our way in a material world, or at least what looks like a material world. In this machine that we inhabit, there's a ghost, you could say. There's a ghost in the machine. And we are spirits in this material world, drinking from the well of being and living our lives out and manifesting the Spirit. And I believe this has always been the Epiphany news, and this has always been the good news. And that is where the answer lies. Amen.